Okay, I want to shoot a video. I want to talk about art under capitalism, and I want to talk about the different competing interests that come in from our media landscape, but mostly I want to talk about this most recent episode of The Pitt Season 2, so I'm probably going to spoil that. Watch if you want to, don't if you don't. Am I sitting like way too high up for this? Am I the only person who had a problem with this most recent episode of The Pitt? To be clear, I'm talking about Season 2, Episode 11 of The Pitt, the hit HBO show about doctors in an emergency room who do the impossible. If you've somehow missed the discourse on The Pitt, in short, it's a TV show where each episode tracks 1 hour of a shift in an emergency room. People are praising it for talking about American burnout. They're praising it for talking about the hospital system in an authentic way. People like that they use all of the right jargon and the right vocabulary. And it's a really good show. I tend to recommend it to everyone. I tried to get my dad to watch it. I talked to all of my med school friends about it. And also this most recent episode was terrible. Is that enough? Is that enough hyperbole? I think you need like hella hyperbole to sell this to a YouTube audience. Okay, am I the only one who thought that Season 2, Episode 11 of The Pitt was the worst 1 hour of television in human history? How's that? I feel like that kind of sold it, right? Hyperbole aside, I do want to talk about The Pitt because there were some interesting things that happened as I was thinking about how much I didn't resonate with the most recent episode, the one that came out last week. And it made me reflect on why I like The Pitt in the first place, not only as a consumer of art and media, but also as a medical student who inevitably, I think, envisions myself in that situation as one of the doctors in the ER, and also as just a citizen of the current political gestures broadly. I really enjoyed the first season of The Pitt, as I think most people did. It reminded people of the ongoing burnout crisis in America. It reminded people about healthcare under duress and under capitalism, and it touched on hot-button political issues, but also held at its core the humanity of the healthcare workers who are on the front lines of making things better. The same groups of people who are frontline heroes during COVID and who inspired me to go down a journey of medicine. Thank you to anybody who did that. Season 2 is a little bit different. I think there are enough people out there talking about the artistic shortcomings of Season 2 that you don't need to hear my opinions here. I think the acting is a little less exciting and the plots are a little bit less well developed. That's not actually what I'm here to talk about. If you haven't seen The Pitt, I probably wouldn't watch this because it wouldn't make that much sense to you, and also why are you spoiling a really good TV show? But maybe you just want to hear me talk about why I think Season 2, Episode 11 of The Pitt is one of the most troubling episodes of television, and not in a good way. Okay, so the way I see it, the way a TV show happens is that major stakeholders come together and their incentives align just enough to make an artistic product. That's how any kind of big commercial artwork is produced, and The Pitt is no stranger to that process. And what you end up receiving then, in terms of the final product, is that cross-section of the Venn diagram between all these different stakeholders and all their different priorities. But, okay, why did I think that episode was so bad, and what do I mean by stakeholder priorities? That's what I'm going to get into, and we'll start with the first point, which is what was so problematic about Season 2, Episode 11 of The Pitt that I wanted to make a video about it, and maybe even love it. You know, I'm happy to be wrong in this case. And I expect that I will be wrong tomorrow when Season 2, Episode 12 comes out and dispels all of this consternation I am currently feeling. But that doesn't discount the 1 week of consternation I have felt here. So, what is the problem, and why did I react so poorly to it? Basically, the way I've kind of described this most recent episode of The Pitt is 55 minutes of watching people get the shit kicked out of them. Not literally, well, not exclusively literally, but all of the negative consequences of all of the different threads that they have woven throughout the season kind of come to a pass in a major way, while engaging with a lot of the hot button ongoing political rhetoric that is primed to make people feel uncomfortable. The backdrop of most of this episode has to do with 2 ICE agents bringing a detained woman into the emergency room for a health checkup prior to their kidnapping and internation of this poor woman, and the knock-on effects that has not only on the staff but also the patients, and the pervasive sense of fear and dread that builds and builds and builds. And instead of resolving in a way that feels productive, as you might want to do with a narrative full of strife and danger, instead the episode only spirals further in on itself. So this detained woman doesn't get the right to a phone call, doesn't get the right to good health care, and that already makes you feel bad. And spoilers, but I've already mentioned the spoiler alert, ultimately a helpful and innocent nurse gets caught up in this and gets detained as well because ICE are am I allowed to say that? I probably am not allowed to say that. It's bad. It's bad, and you know, other unrelated to this, some patients are dying or having major complications that weren't caught in previous episodes. There are people who you think are so routine because the Pitt has set you up to expect that there are just routine patients who come in with a minor kidney stone and leave with their minor kidney stone treated, and instead their bellies are exploding with blood. It's that kind of episode, and it all culminates in this final scene where this patient has been brought in unconscious, who's sedated because he was apparently so combative on the scene, and you're reminded almost immediately of another sedated combative patient, which was the teenager or the 20-something law student who was experiencing one of his first psychotic breaks, either from schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. And you're thinking, okay, well, how bad could it possibly have been? And his buddy comes in and he's talking about how they're like playing golf, and like, you know, this guy, oh man, he's just so drunk. And so you're thinking, all right, this is another nondescript, overly drunk patient on the 4th of July. And instead, he starts waking up, and the nurse who's checking his vitals, who's a nursing student, not even a nurse, is like, oh, I'm just checking your vitals, sir. And he puts her in a headlock and is like, where am I? What are you doing to me? And boom. Cut to black. Cut to credits. If I have the time, I'm going to do an artistic rendering of that moment of just this entire 55-minute span for you, because it was absolutely catastrophic, and I don't think that is an overstatement. There's like so many disclaimers I need to put at the start of this video, like spoiler warnings for the Pitt, and also like the same thing I did last video where I was like, hey, check my credentials, I'm not that guy. I don't have any inside knowledge on the way movies are made, really. I just have theories and thoughts, and then I wanted to extrapolate those into making them a bigger deal than they actually are. And that's the entire YouTube video essay economy, but I don't have time to write an essay. So, YouTube rant economy? So, where were we? Right. I think that's why I felt so activated in the first place about this episode of TV, is that it felt like watching 55 minutes of somebody kicking a puppy and clubbing baby seals. It was just bad news after bad news after bad news. There wasn't an example of a good outcome, which you would expect to at least be sprinkled in there. The Pitt is no stranger to bad circumstances. In past episodes, you have patients dying, you have very emotional deaths of patients, but within that same episode, you might expect a small win. A doctor catches a minor injury or something else. In the very first scene of the very first episode of the very first season of The Pitt, we have Dr. Robbie coming in, dealing with a couple of bad outcomes, a little bit of frustrations from what he's picking up, and also a patient gets rolled in. He makes sure that this patient gets a scan because the patient's missing a tooth. What if you inhaled the tooth? If it's in your lungs, it's a problem. 5 minutes later, hey, it's revealed there was a tooth there in the lung. You did a good job. There's none of those attaboys. There's no small gimmies, little wins, the kinds of things that you kind of aim for when you're working as an emergency medicine doctor. Instead, everything turns out bad. Dr. King's relationship with her sister goes sour, and at the same time, you're reminded that, this patient might die because someone overlooked a diagnosis. But the fact that this episode made me feel bad in and of itself was not the reason I needed to shoot a video, because I have been made to feel bad before, and I didn't hop on and turn on the camera and try to shoot a video about it. Part of it is that it overlaps a little bit with my interests. I mean, I'm an artist, and video art and movies and television are art. I'm also a medical student, and The Pitt is art about medical students and doctors and the healthcare industry. I joke sometimes that I decided to go to medical school because of The Pitt, and that's only kind of true. I was already applying to medical school when The Pitt season 1 first came out, but I wasn't sure I wanted to do it. And I was genuinely considering turning down any offers I got if something else came up that seemed more exciting in the art world in New York, in case I had to leave New York. And the thing that kind of hardened my resolve to go to medical school was the first episode of The Pitt, watching doctors save lives, watching them use lingo I'd never heard of, jargon I didn't know but knew I could learn, talking about the science of diseases that I had no idea people understood, and realizing that I was excited to understand those decisions, those diseases, those drugs, and to take part in that kind of problem solving that was the fuel in the tank, in a very empty tank during medical school application season. And I'm so glad I did, because I'm in medical school now and I'm starting to really see and take part in that learning and those decision-making processes. And so The Pitt is really, really satisfying because it can provide you that sense of catharsis. And this most recent episode of The Pitt didn't do it. And I needed to understand why. And I put together what I thought was a pretty cogent theory on why, and that's why this video exists. Which brings me to part 2. The reason I think episode 11, season 2 of The Pitt sucked, and what I think that means. Part 2 is just why I think it sucked. Part 3 is what I think that means. Okay, so why did it suck so bad? It comes down to important stakeholders, their priorities, and the Venn diagram and the overlaps that produce the television show. And there are 3 big stakeholders that I want to talk about. The first one are the artists, the producers of the show. These are people who are career TV writers. These are people who have been on television shows for forever, like Noah Wiley, who produces it and stars in the show, but also many of the very talented staff writers who are participating in this. And let me be very, very clear, these are not people who I have a problem with. They are very good at what they do. They've demonstrated it in season 2. They demonstrated it in season 1. I'm sure they've shown it off. In many ways, I am very supportive of the art of these people. And what their number one priority is when they're making this television show is to produce art. Yeah, I bet you forgot I had a microphone, but I did. They want to produce art, and they do a good job of it. And a lot of art is following convention. That's not a bad thing. Convention helps save time, and it helps, move us into the decision making that we want to be participating in. And one of those conventions is the second act low point, which is the moment when everything kind of falls apart just before things start to come back together. So, what are some examples of a second act low point? I'm not a film major, but the moment when Spider-Man loses his powers and you feel like everything is going bad and the bad guys are going to win. This is when Marty Supreme has run out of all of his money, has no one left to turn to, and is getting beat out of him by some loan sharks. I don't remember if that happens, but that probably happens. I might be mixing that with Uncut Gems. The second act low point is when it feels like all is lost, and you do this because it sets up audience expectations, it tenses them up, it makes them anticipate a happy ending, so when you give it to them, they feel the catharsis of it. This is all convention, and it makes a lot of sense. And so I can understand why the artists, that first group we're talking about, produce and shoot an episode of the television show, The Pitt, where everything is in the pits, right? People are getting the shit beat out of them. ICE is running amok and doing their agenda, and nobody seems like they're having a good time. They're setting us up for catharsis. I'm aware of that, but that is one motivation that can lead us to where we ended up being. But that doesn't happen in and of itself. And the reason that doesn't happen in and of itself is because a lot of other television shows would try to have that second act low point happen somewhere at the 40-minute mark, so they have 10, 15 more minutes to resolve that conflict just a little bit. Because most television shows happen episode by episode. This is less the case now, which brings in our second group of stakeholders, and those are modern streaming executives, I guess, or modern streaming television producers, directors, writers, people who are writing mostly for the current zeitgeist of American television, which really encourages the binge model. So instead of planning arcs on a episode by episode basis, you would plan arcs on a season by season basis, because you've done your market research and you realize most people just let the autoplay button take them from episode 1 all the way to episode 22 of a TV show. And so instead of planning an arc just for each episode, I'll just plan an arc for the whole season. Most people are watching it that way anyways. And that's totally valid also. So, okay, most people I've talked to about The Pitt kind of admit that they binged it, right? It lends itself very well to that setup. As I mentioned in my description of this show, each episode takes place over the course of 1 hour on a hospital shift out of a 15-hour shift. So after 7 a.m. to 8 a.m., it's so easy and the most natural thing to go from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., right? The show leans into the binge model of television, and that's one of its strengths. I like that when I watch episode 1 of season 1 and then I roll right into episode 2 of season 1, sometimes I can forget that an episode change even happened because the plot point dropped off at the end, is picked up immediately at the beginning, and it's seamless. And if I ever had 15 hours to just sit in front of a TV, I'd spend all 15 watching season 1 of The Pitt. If you haven't done it yet, please do it. I recommend it. So you're probably wondering, like, what's the problem, okay? You like that the artists, stakeholder group 1, get to pursue the artistic convention of a second act low point, and they're doing it on the binge model, fitting the stakeholders part 2 here. And so it makes sense that if your second act low point of an episode happens at the 40-minute mark, that your second act low point of a season of 15 episodes happens at the 11th episode mark. Right? Does that kind of make sense? Basically what I'm trying to say is episode 11 set us up for great catharsis in episodes 12, 13, 14, 15, and that satisfies both camps. Group 1 gets to make their art, and they get to follow convention, and they get to tell interesting and exciting stories and keep viewers and watchers hooked. And Group 2 gets a really bingeable TV show. So that way, when season 2 is all the way out, you can watch it, and by the time you start running out of steam at 11 hours into binging this TV show, you're suddenly kicked in the nuts with a terrible, terrible circumstance that makes you have to watch episode 12 to get a little bit of catharsis. And that's totally fine. But if you've been listening carefully, you've probably already picked up on the problem here. The artists are planning a second act low point, and they're predicting that the second act is the 11th episode because the streaming executives plan for this to be a bingeable show. So they look at the numbers and think most people watch it in one go from episode 1 all the way to episode 15. And they go back to the artist, and the artists realize that, and they make it so that way the second act low point happens on the 11th episode, which is the right timing for things. And we fall into one small little caveat. You might have noticed it. If you've been keeping up with the Pitt, then you've definitely noticed it. And here's the problem that I encountered. And I wonder if I'm alone in this or if other people kind of felt it. The Pitt was not released as a bingeable season of television, episodes 1 to 15. It is being released actively on a weekly television release schedule because there is a secret third stakeholder group participating here. Jesus. Okay, so who is this mysterious third stakeholder, and why did they ruin an episode of television for me? I don't want to get into the politics or the news of it all, but HBO Max and HBO is currently being acquired by Netflix, probably, and Paramount Skydance as a company. Less likely, but maybe, right? There's this active conversation going between Warner Bros. Discovery and Netflix for the acquisition of HBO, among other things. I don't know too much about it. I guess it was in the news for a little bit, and now it's not in the news, so I don't know what's happening with it. But the point is, there are active capital decisions that are being made that are having a downstream effect on art, and I think I've identified a situation in which that happened. Same caveats as before. I have no inside knowledge on this. This could be totally pulling this out of my rear end, like that one scene in The Pitt when they... Anyways. But it makes sense to me, so I wanted to talk about it and see how other people felt about it, because I think that third group of stakeholders are big picture company executives who are looking at HBO Max and its artistic properties not necessarily as TV shows or even as art products, but as capital assets which diversify a set of portfolio demands and can reward shareholders with a certain amount of value. And the reason I think that is I look at one of the big rationales behind the Netflix purchase of HBO Max, and what I see is Netflix, a company known for very digestible, kind of cheap, fluffy movies and TV. Obviously they make the occasional prestige hit, but most of it is To All the Boys I've Loved Before. Good, but it's not winning any awards. And they look at HBO, which is known for hit prestige television, the kind of place where they blur the line between TV and movies, The Sopranos, Game of Thrones, and in this case, The Pitt, right? The kind of platform that produces and hosts The Pitt. And it sees prestige. And prestige television not only means big plot points and interesting characters and complex writing, but in today's environment, prestige television is kind of denoted by the weekly release schedule. So a show that comes out all at once, each season is just dumped on you like a Netflix show. That's binge, that's trash, that's second screen content. Good for the people at home, it's never winning any awards. And the big boy shows, the ones that come out every week, the ones that generate a little bit of buzz, the ones that feel a little bit more like television back when your granddad first bought a television, those are prestigious. And those are over across the pond in HBO land, so Netflix wanted to buy it. Basically what I'm saying is, I think one of the motivations behind The Pitt releasing on a weekly schedule is that it bolstered its credibility in terms of a net capital asset that thus improved the valuation of HBO when it was being bought by Netflix or when it was being bid for by Paramount Skydance. And I don't think that conversation of stakeholder 3 here, people who want to improve the sale price of HBO Max, I don't think that conversation happened in conjunction with conversations of people 1 and 2, or stakeholders 1 and 2. And the reason I don't think that is because nobody thought about what would happen if your one singular weekly release of The Pitt was season 2, episode 11, the second act low point, the thing that the binge model would use to push you to watch more TV, and the one that the artists used to set up a sense of consternation and ennui with the expectation of catharsis down the line. I think if the showrunners knew that the most ardent fans who were watching this on release every week when it came out, if those showrunners knew that we would be feeling this level of consternation, they would have given us a singular win in the episode, maybe. Instead, that's what we got. We got constant, nonstop second act low point, and I've been sitting with that for a week. And it makes me like the show less. And I don't think they want that. And I don't want that. Okay, I'm editing this video, and it's occurring to me that I am maybe overstating the point here. It's totally possible, in fact very likely, that they knew that people would react this way when it came out on a weekly basis, and that they wanted you to stew in negative emotions for a week to build up anticipation for the next episodes. I'm still going to watch the next episodes, and I probably will forget about the negative feelings I felt for the last 7 days, and that's probably more the point. So I'm both giving the showrunners more credit for understanding what they're doing, and maybe less credit because they put me through a very negative experience of watching. But also, you know, TV and art doesn't owe you a good time. They don't owe you comfortability or happiness. So maybe that's fine. I'm still rolling with what I said last night when I was filming this video, because I think I, was hitting upon some of the troubles that I encounter when I think about juggling capital demands and art creation. But just know that it's not lost on me that I said, oh, this is a devastating, terrible thing that, HBO Max did, and also made a video about it, which is like kind of the point of leaving people feeling activated with between episodes of TV is to make them talk about it, and maybe they'll talk about it on YouTube and get more ad revenue and more eyes and more attention on this show that they're trying to promote. And I did it. I did the thing. I fell right into your trap. Good job. All right, I'm gonna go back to the show, but I just needed to say that. Bye. I mean, I really like the show. I still really like the show, and I want to continue liking it. I just think this is what happens with art under capitalism. Art when capital has a seat at the table, at the decision-making table, If I was making these paintings with any expectation that they would sell to somebody, or not even that they would sell to somebody, but the fact that my creation is improving its value as a capital asset, if that factored into the process of creation, I think I could still make really good art. I think season 2 of The Pitt will still be really good art, and I also know that deconstructing it from a lens of where was the capital influence would reveal that it is less than it could have been, that there were negative consequences that I didn't fully consider. Okay, hang on. I had a prop last time, so I'm bringing a prop this time. Don't worry, I didn't have to run very far for it. I wanted to talk about the cultural influence of The Pitt, and the way I thought to do that was to talk about one of the things that made me think enough people watched this season to talk about it, which is from this opinion column here. I don't know if you can see it, but there's... Here. Alright. Can you read that? The television show every American should watch. It's fine. It's a good review of The Pitt season 2. It talks about the politics of the show, which I think are relevant and important. I think It hits on the imperfection of a lot of the characters in a way that I recognized but didn't fully consider. And also, it's from the opinion column of the New York Times, which is itself kind of an evil company. Like, they do good investigative journalism. They produce really good work. I love the art section. I read it every day if I can. I like that it provides an independent voice in a lot of situations, but not a fully independent voice, especially not the opinions column, which is just awash with the worst takes about Gaza and Palestine and Iran and the Middle East that you've ever seen, because it's not a neutral platform for art. It is a media company that makes money, and so is HBO Max. And so I want to praise the Pitt season 2 the same way that that opinion author in the New York Times praises it. And I do. It has all of those positive strengths. And also, I recognize the machinations of capital under the surface. I hope you recognize it right now. I am producing this video because I am motivated, because I am amped up about the factors that go into the creation of an artwork that I enjoy and I want to understand. And also, I'm posting this on a platform that ostensibly trades your attention for advertising dollars that are used to line the pockets of shareholders of Google and the Alphabet company. That's not lost on me. It's not lost on me that most of the art that I'm exposed to these days are either on Instagram or the New York Times or YouTube or Reddit or some other for-profit platform. And so if the medium is the message and the medium is plagued with these financially motivated stakeholders, maybe the best we can do is to call them out. Not even call them out, just to identify them. Realize when they're happening, when they're having an effect, and most importantly, when they're having a negative effect. Like I think the capital influences did on season 2, episode 11 of The Pitt. And it's not, the point isn't that like they made a bad thing and they should feel bad about it. They made a fine thing that made me feel bad, and I think the reason it made me feel bad is because capitalism makes me feel bad. Am I allowed to say that? Am I gonna bleep that out too, like I bleeped out the other things? Maybe. Anybody who's already inclined to agree with me that capitalism sucks already thinks so. And people who think deeply about art probably know capitalism sucks, and we do it anyways. It's not just media and art that's hosted on media that's affected by this. I think most doctors in medicine bump up against this every day of their life when they come in wanting to save lives, wanting to do a certain amount of good, and most of their work is undergirded by the capital machinations of the hospital industrial complex. We had a healthcare ethics discussion the other day with a internal medicine doctor kind of leading the discussion, who was telling me that most of his job is fighting the hospital administrators to justify why the medical care that he needs is necessary. Why, if he's ordering an MRI for a patient, they have to do it, and they shouldn't deny it just because MRIs are expensive to run, or more expensive to run than that patient's particular insurance is going to be able to reimburse. That is the daily struggle of doctors, and it mirrors the daily struggle of artists who are juggling the exact same considerations of, I want to do this kind of good, and the system that enables me to do it also requires me to do less good. All right. I think that's the video. My hair is dry now, and there's flashcards to memorize, so I'll see you next time I feel this amped up about something. Jesus. I don't think I smiled enough during this video. People are gonna think I'm so angry and upset about things, but I'm actually a really cool and exciting and interesting person. Oh, I had a whole thing I was gonna say about this freaking shirt also being an example of that. I love Jean-Michel Basquiat, as any art student would, and also it's ridiculous to me that sells a dead person's artwork, you know? That didn't make it in the video. It still probably won't. I picked it up on sale. Does that count? It was like 70% on clearance. Does that make it better or worse to buy the shirt? If I was already unwilling to buy it at full price because I didn't want to line the pockets of Target execs selling the ostensibly anti-capitalist work of Basquiat, should I be more okay with it if they sold it to me at a loss? Probably not. Probably not. I think the fact that I mentioned that I bought this shirt from has already offset any costs in terms of the publicity and the reputational benefit. So maybe I'll censor the name. Yeah, just generic big box retailer, and I'll let you figure out where that was and whether or not the ethics of buying a large mega corporation's greedy capture of art is worth it. Sound off in the comments and like, comments. No, I'm not saying that. All right, bye.